there. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge Wurundjeri country, as that is where this podcast is recorded, and extend this acknowledgement to all First Nations peoples, past, present, and emerging. This podcast takes a holistic approach on community building and knowledge sharing that I hope you can utilise in your life. Let's do this.
Light and coffee black. Lesson plans are on the stack. Ready for the students' track. Gonna find our groove.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Stranger in the Staff Room, where myself, Zoe Zammit, or as the kids call me, Miss Zammit, I am a first-time teacher that shares lifelong stories, and as well as focus episodes. So, we are back with another focus episode. It has been a while, and this will be gradually parted. By that, I mean that this first part will be sort of like an overview, sort of like your first exposure, and then later on, when I am experiencing the second part in real time, you will get a focus episode there. So, what are we actually talking about? We are talking about VIT registration. So, the Victorian Institute of Teaching, registering to be a first-time teacher there, basically. Yeah, so we'll get into it, but you first register as a provisional teacher. I will also be talking about registering to be a teacher across Australia, and then the second half will be the focus on VIT registration, because that is what I personally have gone through and am going through. So I would like you, just as a disclaimer, to treat this episode almost like a condensed Google search, a more entertaining Google search, if you will. So there will be some general information, but of course, every person and everyone's situation is different. So if you'd like further information on something, please, I encourage you to do the research. So, without any further ado, let's get started.
Every day we learn and grow, setting minds all in a row, teaching them what they need to know, feeling that we're smooth.
Alrighty, we are back. And if you're wondering why I'm wearing the same outfit as a previous episode, which would be about parent-teacher interviews, I have learnt the beauty of batch recording. So these are recorded on the same day, and I have learnt it from Megan Short, the host of Life's Your podcast. When she goes on holiday, she batch records. She'll have a whole day of just recording 4 episodes at once. And her work ethic is similar to mine. So I was like, you know what, let's just give it a go. Even though a lot of my content is in real time, these focus episodes can be recorded at any time. So yeah, we're giving it a shot, which could help with the consistency of the podcast as well. So fingers crossed that works. Like we said in the introduction, I am first going to be talking about registering to be a teacher across Australia. And then in the second half, we will be talking about specifically VIT. So a lot of this information comes from the SITSR website, which are the governing body for the standards you must meet to be a registered teacher. So, the steps in being a registered teacher. You must complete a relevant degree. So, I completed a double degree, which is a Bachelor of Secondary Education and a Bachelor of Humanities Arts. So, the secondary education is a relevant degree. To register through your relevant state's institute. So, for example, for me, it would be VIT, because I teach in Victoria. If successful, you'll be considered a provisionally registered teacher. Full registration is granted once the teacher has hit the proficient career stage of the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers, or APSTs. So when you graduate, you have been recognised as achieving the graduate column, which I might put a visual up in the YouTube version of this podcast episode. So if you're more of a visual learner and you're on Spotify, jump over to YouTube. There'll be more details there. So when you graduate, you are considered efficient in the graduate column. So then you move on to proficient. And then you must show that you are completing that column, the proficient column, to then be a fully registered teacher. The reason that there's 2 parts to this focus episode is because this part is based on registering and being approved as a provisionally registered teacher. The second part will be about going from a provisionally registered to a full registered. There is a project that you must do to show that you are capable of all those Australian professional standards for teachers in the proficient column. Teaching registration varies from state to state or territory. However, states and territories in Australia and New Zealand offer mutual recognition. So you need to check your eligibility before making these decisions. But what that means is that, for example, if I register to be a teacher in Victoria and then one day I'm like, you know what, I am done with this Melbourne weather. I'm going to pick myself up and move to Sydney, for example. There is mutual recognition. So there might be some steps that I have to undertake, but I don't have to go through the full registration process like I've just graduated. But yeah, like I said, check your eligibility before making those decisions, because you could be teaching in Queensland from New South Wales, but you haven't completed this one step, so technically you're doing something illegal, and I don't want any of you to be going through that because, I couldn't imagine anything worse. So, the process of maintaining and renewing your registration differs from state to state or territory. So some states or territories can offer alternative authorisation for people unable to receive a provisional or full registration. So once again, if that sounds like that could apply to you, I would encourage you to do your own research. Okay, so that's the general basis of registering to be a teacher in all of Australia. In our next half, we are going to be talking about specifically Victoria. So if that applies to you, don't go anywhere.
Every day we learn and grow, setting minds all in a row, teaching them what they need to know, feeling that we're smooth.
Alrighty, we're back. So let's talk about registering to be a provisional teacher in Victoria. So you need to start off by creating a My VIT account. Now, those open up, like the registering process opens up in August and September and December and January. So that's to reflect when PSTs, pre-service teachers, finish their courses. So they might finish halfway through the year, so that's that August-September time, or they might finish at the end of the year, so that December-January time. Now, the reason I created this focus episode is because I was just at uni one day doing my assessments, and it was more like watching YouTube, but you know what I mean. And an email popped up about VIT registration, and I was like, hang on, so getting the degree isn't enough? I have to register? Like, it was such a shock to me. And if it wasn't for my tutors and my lecturers being so proactive, because the one that was in charge of this sort of seminar that we learnt about all this stuff, she's very proactive and I love her to bits. If it wasn't for that, I'd be gone. Like, I would not know what to do. In saying that, the school that I work at, when I did my interview, they sort of made it clear that that's the steps that I had to take. So maybe I'm being a little bit over dramatic, but I think it's nice to know before you get an email like that this is something you have to do. So you create your My VIT account and you select your registration type. So you would be registering to be a provisional teacher if you are coming straight out of university. You then need to complete the application modules. So there are 5 of these, and I would recommend being at home to complete these because there are a lot of documents that you need that I'm hoping are at your house. If they're not, your parents' house? I don't know. Anyway, we'll give some context. But yeah, I tried to do bits and pieces of this like while I was out and things like that, and I just had to stop after 5 minutes because I needed a document. So I'd recommend setting out 3 hours. You won't even need 3 hours. You might even just need an hour and a half, but if you're a procrastinator like me, 3 hours to submit this application with all the documentation you need. So you need to supply your qualifications. So this is your academic transcript and your digital version of your certificate. They are provided to you by the university once you have completed all your units and your scores have come out and things like that. However, if you would like to know like sort of the progress of those documents, I guess you could email like your course coordinator or things like that. But that's a good rule of thumb because obviously all universities work differently. You need to provide a criminal record check. I think I was able to do this through the VIT application. Like I didn't have to go out of my own way, but it did cost me extra on top of the registration fee, which you got to do what you got to do. So I will be talking about application fees in a little bit. Just know that mine was a little bit different because of having that criminal check. You need proof of identity. So from memory, it was 1 primary source of identification and then 2 secondary. So, for example, I used my driver's license, passport, and birth certificate just to make sure you're not a catfish. You know what I mean? Then you also need proof of identity in terms of address history. So, from memory, it's anywhere that you've lived within the past 5 years, which is pretty standard when you're doing something government-based. So, no surprises there. And then you have your suitability, which is almost like a contract, like knowing what your role is as a teacher and keeping up to date with your registration. So there's a lot of tick boxes. So that one's pretty quick to get through. Make sure you read it. Yes, make sure you read it. Anyway, then you go on to the application payment process. So here's some figures for you, but again, it can be subject to change. So if you would like specifics, I would suggest doing some further research yourself. The registration fee with Victorian qualifications, so for example, I completed my degree in Victoria, so the registration was $165.87, whereas the registration fee, if you have qualifications from elsewhere, so that could be different states or territories or internationally, it's $191.83. And then your annual renewal, if paid on time, is $124.12. Now, word of advice, that renewal may or may not be partially covered by the school you work at. So you don't ask, you don't get. So you could clarify with your school whether you are eligible to have some of that covered by them. And the renewal time is usually September from memory. So for example, I now have my provisional registration that will be due the 30th of September next year. Yep, so I have this year and then a little bit. Then once you've paid that, it takes 4 to 6 weeks to assess, and then you get your approval or your denial. I think it might have been due to the time that I completed mine, so don't take this as gospel, but I'm pretty sure mine came back within like 3 weeks. Like, they were pretty quick. So the sooner you can get onto it, the better, I'd say anyway, because there'll be a lot of people that are rushing it at the last minute. So that's basically all the information I have so far on registering to be a provisional teacher. I actually had a meeting with my principal at my school, and they have a lot of resources for the project that we have to do as graduate teachers to then become a fully registered teacher. They also, at least VIT, have seminars that you can go to, or they're on Zoom, sort of giving you some introduction into what they expect, which is great. So you have 2 years, so your first 2 years of teaching to complete that project. So yeah, I'm going to try and jump on it early because I don't do things by halves. I'm going to one of those seminars that I just mentioned in June, I think, from memory. And then I'm going to, obviously before that, contact my principals and things and see what resources they have, just so then I can make myself familiar before we jump straight into it. And from my understanding now, I haven't done any research yet, but from my understanding now, very similar to the GTPA. So that's why they've sort of made the GTPA as well. So then it's not this big scary thing when you do your project. So yeah, stay tuned for that second part, which will come later on in the year. Yeah, if you have any questions or bits of information that I might have missed about registering to be a teacher in Australia, please leave them in the comments below. And any other ways to be a part of the SITSR community, the Stranger in the Staff Room community, will be in the link in my show notes. So without any further ado, Stranger in the Staff Room over and out.
Teaching vibes were in the air, sharing knowledge everywhere, guiding young minds with such care. This is what we do.